The sky over Nashville had been threatening rain all afternoon, hanging low and gray like a wool blanket stretched too thin. It was mid-October, and the temperature had dropped to a crisp 50 degrees, the kind of cold that seeped through thin jackets and reminded residents that summer was truly over. On Music Row, the heart of Nashville's country music industry, the sidewalks were quieter than usual. The tourists who normally crowded the streets, snapping photos of recording studios and historic markers, had retreated indoors, seeking shelter from the impending storm. Daniel Foster sat on the corner of 16th Avenue South and Edgehill Avenue, his battered acoustic guitar resting across his lap. At 28 years old, he looked older than his years. Dark circles shadowed his hazel eyes, and his brown hair, longer than he usually kept it, hung damp against his forehead. He wore a faded denim jacket over a black t-shirt, both of which had seen better days. His guitar case lay open at his feet, containing a meager collection of coins and a few crumpled dollar bills. The first drops of rain began to fall, light and hesitant at first, then gaining confidence. Daniel felt the cold water on his face, but didn't move. He couldn't afford to. This corner, this spot where Music Row met the residential edges of Edgehill, had become his territory over the past 6 months. It wasn't the best location for street performing. That honor belonged to Broadway downtown, but it was his, and on good days, he could make enough to cover at least one bill. He began to play, his fingers moving across the strings with practiced ease. The song was his own composition, something he'd written late one night when his father's medical bills had piled so high on the kitchen table that he couldn't see past them. The melody was melancholic but hopeful, a reflection of his own complicated emotions. His voice, rough around the edges but genuine, cut through the sound of falling rain. Most people hurried past, heads down, umbrellas up, absorbed in their own worlds. Daniel had grown used to being invisible. In Nashville, a city overflowing with talented musicians, street performers were as common as honky-tonks. Everyone had a dream here. Everyone had a story. And his was just one among thousands. Visit Music City. Inside the Bluebird Cafe, the legendary venue where so many careers had been launched, Reba McEntire was finishing up a private meeting with her management team. At 69 years old, the Queen of Country had nothing left to prove. With more than 30 studio albums, 24 #1 singles, and a legacy that had shaped the country music industry for decades, she had earned every accolade that came her way. But success had never made her complacent, and it certainly hadn't made her forget where she came from. "Reba, the car is ready whenever you are," her assistant Jennifer Walsh said softly, glancing at her phone. "But the weather's getting worse. We might want to wait it out for a few minutes." Reba looked out the window at the rain, now falling in steady sheets. She smiled, a warm expression that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "I've been through worse than this, Jen. Oklahoma storms make this look like a sprinkle." She stood, gathering her purse and slipping on her burgundy leather jacket. "Besides, I've got dinner plans with Charlie at 6, and you know how he gets when I'm late." Jennifer laughed, knowing Reba's husband well enough to appreciate the comment. "All right, but let me at least walk out with you." They stepped out into the rain, and immediately Reba heard it. A voice, male, singing with a raw honesty that made her stop mid-step. She'd heard thousands of singers in her life, had judged countless competitions, mentored numerous up-and-coming artists. But there was something about this voice, something that cut through the noise and the rain and the general indifference of the city. "Do you hear that?" Reba asked, turning her head to locate the source. Jennifer listened, then nodded. "Street performer. There's one on almost every corner around here." "Not like that. There isn't," Reba said. Without waiting for a response, she walked toward the sound, her boots clicking against the wet pavement. Daniel was halfway through the second verse when he noticed her approaching. At first, he thought she was just another pedestrian, albeit one who didn't seem in much of a hurry to escape the rain. Then, as she got closer, recognition hit him like a physical force. Reba McEntire. The Reba McEntire. Standing there in front of him, rain dripping off her jacket, watching him with an intensity that made his fingers stumble on the strings. He stopped playing, his mouth suddenly dry. "I'm sorry, Don't apologize," Reba said, her voice firm but kind. "Why'd you stop?" That was beautiful. Daniel stared at her, convinced for a moment that he was hallucinating. Maybe the cold had finally gotten to him. Maybe this was what hypothermia felt like. You're Reba McEntire." She smiled, that famous smile he'd seen on album covers and award shows. "Last time I checked. And you are?" Daniel Foster." He set his guitar aside carefully, as if afraid any sudden movement would break the spell and she'd disappear. "Well, Daniel Foster, you've got a gift. That song, is it yours?" He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "I thought so. It's got heart, real heart. Not the kind you can manufacture or fake." She glanced up at the darkening sky, then back at him. "How long have you been out here?" "Today? About 4 hours, in general?" He gave a self-deprecating laugh. "Longer than I'd like to admit." Reba studied him for a moment, taking in the worn clothes, the tired eyes, the guitar that had clearly seen years of use. She'd been in the music business long enough to recognize hunger when she saw it. Not for fame or fortune, though those were nice, but for the chance to be heard, to matter, to make something beautiful in a world that often felt too harsh. "You performing anywhere? Any gigs lined up?" Daniel shook his head. "Not right now. I play here most days, and I had a regular slot at a bar in East Nashville, but they closed down 3 months ago. Since then, it's been quiet." "Nashville's gotten more competitive over the years," Reba said, a note of sympathy in her voice. "When I first came here back in the 70s, it was tough, but there was still room to breathe, you know? Now everyone and their cousin is trying to make it in Music City." "Yeah," Daniel agreed, "but I can't give up. Music is—" He trailed off, searching for the right words. "It's the only thing that makes sense to me." Reba understood that sentiment better than most. Music had saved her, given her purpose when she was just a young girl from Oklahoma singing at rodeos with her siblings. "I know exactly what you mean." Jennifer appeared at Reba's elbow, holding an umbrella over both of them. "Reba, we really should go. The traffic is going to be terrible." But Reba wasn't ready to leave yet. She reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. Daniel watched as she took out several bills. He couldn't see the denominations, but from the thickness of the stack, he knew it was more than he usually made in a week, and placed them carefully in his guitar case. "Miss McEntire, you don't have to—" "I know I don't have to," she said. "I want to." Then she did something that surprised both Daniel and Jennifer. She reached back into her purse, this time pulling out a business card. She handed it to Daniel, and he took it with trembling fingers. "That's my manager's direct line," Reba explained. "In 30 days, on November 15th, we're holding auditions at my studio for a songwriters showcase. It's a small event, very intimate. Just a few musicians performing original work for some industry folks. I'd like you to be there." Daniel looked at the card, then at her, then back at the card. Are you serious?" "As a heart attack," Reba said. "But here's the thing, Daniel. 30 days might not seem like much, but it's enough time to prepare, to really polish your material. If you're going to do this, I need you to show up ready. Not street corner ready, but professional ready. Can you do that?" The rain was falling harder now, running down Daniel's face like tears. He wanted to say yes, to scream it at the top of his lungs, but uncertainty gripped him. 30 days. In 30 days, would he even still have an apartment? Would his father's health hold out that long? Would he be able to focus on music when everything else in his life was falling apart? But looking at Reba McEntire, at this legend who had stopped in the middle of a rainstorm to listen to him, to see him, he knew there was only one answer he could give. "Yes, ma'am, I'll be there." Reba nodded, satisfied. "Good. I'm looking forward to it." She started to turn away, then paused. "And Daniel? Don't give up on that corner. You never know who might be listening." He watched her walk back to her car, Jennifer at her side, and he remained standing there long after the black sedan had disappeared into the rain-soaked traffic. In his hand, the business card was already starting to get wet, so he carefully tucked it into his jacket's inner pocket, right against his chest, where he could feel it. 30 days. The rain continued to fall, but Daniel didn't notice it anymore. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. The apartment Daniel shared with his father was located in Antioch, a neighborhood about 12 miles southeast of downtown Nashville. It wasn't the worst area in the city, but it wasn't the best either. The complex, a two-story structure with faded yellow siding, had seen better days. The parking lot was cracked and uneven, filled with potholes that turned into small lakes whenever it rained. Daniel's unit was on the second floor, number 214, accessible by an exterior staircase that rattled ominously with each step. By the time he climbed those stairs that evening, his clothes were soaked through and his guitar case felt like it weighed 100 pounds. But in his pocket, both the money Reba had given him and her business card burned with possibility. He opened the door quietly, hoping his father might be asleep. Robert Foster spent most of his days sleeping now, the cancer treatments leaving him exhausted and frail. But as Daniel stepped inside, he heard the television's low murmur from the living room. "Danny? That you?" His father's voice was weak, a pale shadow of the booming baritone Daniel remembered from childhood. "Yeah, Dad. It's me." Daniel set his guitar case by the door and shrugged off his wet jacket, hanging it on a hook in the small entryway. The apartment was tiny, just a living room that flowed into a kitchen, one bathroom, and 2 small bedrooms. But it was home, and Daniel was fighting like hell to keep it that way. He found his father on the couch, wrapped in the old quilt Daniel's grandmother had made decades ago. Robert Foster was 62, but looked 80. The chemotherapy had stolen his hair, his weight, and much of his vitality. What it hadn't stolen was his spirit, though even that seemed dimmer these days. "Good day?" Robert asked, muting the television. Daniel thought about the encounter with Reba McEntire, the card in his pocket, the 30-day deadline. "Actually, yeah, a really good day." Robert's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's so? You meet a pretty girl or something?" Daniel laughed, pulling a chair from the kitchen table and sitting down beside the couch. "Not exactly. I met Reba McEntire." His father's expression shifted from mild curiosity to disbelief. "Reba McEntire? The Reba McEntire? The one and only. She heard me playing on Music Row, stopped to listen, and..." Daniel pulled out the business card, handling it like it was made of glass. "She gave me this. Invited me to audition for some songwriters' showcase in 30 days. Robert took the card, studying it carefully. When he looked back at his son, his eyes were wet. "Danny, that's incredible. That's..." A coughing fit interrupted him, harsh and rattling. Daniel was at his side immediately, supporting him, waiting for it to pass. When it finally did, Robert leaned back against the cushions, exhausted. "Sorry," he muttered. "Don't apologize, Dad." Daniel took the card back, tucking it safely into his pocket. "You need to rest. I've been resting all day. What I need is to hear more about this. Reba McEntire, Danny. Do you know what this could mean? Daniel did know. He knew it could mean everything. A real shot at a music career, at making something of himself, at finally getting out from under the crushing weight of debt and worry that had defined the past 3 years. But he also knew that 30 days was both an eternity and no time at all. It means I need to practice, Daniel said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. I need to be ready. You'll be ready. You've been ready for years. Nashville just needed to catch up. Robert smiled, and for a moment, Daniel could see his father as he used to be. Strong, optimistic, unshakable. They talked for a while longer, with Robert offering advice and encouragement despite his obvious fatigue. Eventually, Daniel convinced him to go to bed, helping him to his feet and supporting him during the slow walk to the bedroom. Once his father was settled, Daniel returned to the living room and picked up his guitar. He played quietly, not wanting to disturb Robert, but needing to process the day's events. His fingers found familiar chords, then drifted into new territory, experimenting with melodies that had been floating in his head. The rain continued outside, a steady percussion against the windows. Around midnight, a knock at the door startled him. Daniel set his guitar aside and checked the peephole, then smiled and opened the door. Emily Richardson stood in the hallway, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing scrubs from her shift at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. At 27, Emily had been Daniel's best friend since high school. The one person who had stuck by him through everything. His mother's death, his father's diagnosis, the slow disintegration of his musical aspirations into street corner performances. "I saw your light on," she said, keeping her voice low. "Figured you'd still be up. Rough day?" "Actually, no. Come in." Daniel stepped aside, and Emily entered, immediately noticing his wet clothes hanging in the bathroom and the unusual energy in his demeanor. "What happened? You look like you won the lottery." "I might have. Or at least gotten a lottery ticket." He told her about meeting Reba McEntire, about the invitation, about the 30 days. Emily listened without interrupting, her blue eyes growing wider with each detail. When he finished, she grabbed him in a fierce hug. "Oh my God, Danny! This is it. This is your break." "Maybe," Daniel said, but he was smiling. "If I can pull it off." Emily pulled back, her hands on his shoulders. "What do you mean, if? Of course you can pull it off. You're one of the most talented people I know." "Talent doesn't pay the bills, Em. And speaking of bills," he gestured to the kitchen table, where envelopes were stacked in ominous piles. "We're 3 months behind on rent. The electric company sent another disconnect notice. And Dad's next round of treatment is coming up, which means more medical bills we can't afford." Emily's expression softened. She walked to the table, looking at the envelopes without touching them. "How much do you need?" "Don't," Daniel said quickly. "You've already helped us more than we deserve." "It's not about deserving, you idiot. It's about being there for people you care about." She'd had this argument with him before, multiple times. Emily worked long hours as an ICU nurse, and while she made a decent living, she wasn't rich. But she'd given Daniel money whenever she could, had bought groceries for him and Robert, had even paid for one of Robert's hospital stays when insurance didn't cover it all. "I know, and I appreciate it more than you can imagine. But I can't keep taking from you. I need to figure this out on my own." "You're not on your own, Danny. You've never been on your own." Emily moved closer, her voice gentle but firm. "Look, I know you're proud, and I know you want to handle everything yourself. But this opportunity with Reba McEntire, you can't let money worries sabotage it. You need to focus on your music, on being ready for that audition." Daniel sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know how to do both. I don't know how to prepare for the biggest opportunity of my life, while watching my dad get sicker and worrying about whether we'll have a roof over our heads next month. Emily sat across from him, reaching across the table to take his hand. Then let me worry about some of it. Let me help with the bills this month. And you focus on what you do best. Making music. I'm not asking, Danny. I'm telling you. This is what friends do. Her grip tightened. Besides, when you're famous and playing sold-out shows at Bridgestone Arena, you can pay me back with interest. And backstage passes. Despite everything, Daniel laughed. Deal. They sat there for a while, talking about everything and nothing. Emily's shift at the hospital, the terrible coffee in the break room, the patient who'd propositioned her despite being old enough to be her grandfather. Normal things, everyday things, that made the world feel less overwhelming. When Emily finally left around 2 in the morning, promising to stop by again soon, Daniel felt lighter. He knew the challenges ahead were real and daunting, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could face them. He picked up his guitar again, playing softly in the dim lamplight. 30 days. He had 30 days to transform himself from a street performer into someone worthy of standing on Reba McEntire's stage. 30 days to prove that the faith she'd placed in him wasn't misplaced. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and through the window, Daniel could see clouds breaking apart, revealing glimpses of stars. He played until dawn. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity and anxiety. Daniel threw himself into preparation with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Every morning, he woke at 6, made breakfast for his father, ensured Robert took his medications, and then spent the next several hours practicing. He worked on his original songs, refining lyrics, smoothing out rough melodic edges, experimenting with different arrangements. But preparation required more than just practice. It required money, for new guitar strings, for better clothes to wear to the audition, for the small things that added up quickly, which meant Daniel still needed to perform on the streets, still needed to hustle for every dollar. It was a delicate balance, and most days, Daniel felt like he was failing at both. On day 8, he was back on his corner on Music Row, the afternoon sun warm on his face. October had given way to early November, and the weather had turned crisp and clear. Tourists were out in force, taking advantage of the beautiful day to explore Nashville's musical landmarks. Daniel played steadily, his guitar case open, watching people pass by. Some stopped to listen for a song or two, tossing in a few dollars before moving on. Others walked past without acknowledging him, lost in conversations or phone screens. He'd learned not to take it personally. Everyone had their own lives, their own concerns. Around 3 o'clock, a man in his 50s stopped to listen. He wore an expensive-looking suit, and his salt and pepper hair was styled perfectly. After Daniel finished his song, the man approached. "You're good," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "You writing your own stuff?" "Yes, sir. That last one was mine." The man nodded, pulling out his wallet. He dropped a $20 bill into the guitar case. "I'm Lawrence Bennett. I work in A&R at one of the labels here in town. You got a demo? Any recordings?" Daniel's heart raced. This was the kind of connection he'd been dreaming of for years. "I have some rough recordings, yeah. Nothing professional, but get me something I can actually listen to," Lawrence interrupted, handing him a business card. "Email it to that address. If I like what I hear, we can talk." "Thank you, sir. I really appreciate—" But Lawrence was already walking away, phone pressed to his ear, absorbed in the next call, the next meeting, the next potential star. Daniel looked at the card, then at the $20 in his case. It should have felt like progress, like validation. Instead, it felt like pressure. Another card, another opportunity. Another chance to fail. That evening, back at the apartment, Daniel tried to record some of his songs using the cheap microphone he'd bought at a pawn shop years ago. But every take sounded wrong. Too rough, too amateur, not polished enough. He recorded the same song 12 times before giving up in frustration. "Sounds good to me," Robert said from the doorway. He was having a good day, which meant he was awake and mobile, though still weak. "It sounds like garbage," Daniel muttered, deleting the file. "It sounds like music, and music is never garbage." Robert shuffled into the room, easing himself into the old recliner in the corner. "What's really bothering you?" Daniel set his guitar aside. "I don't know if I can do this, Dad. I got another contact today. Some A&R guy who wants to hear my demos. And I've got the Reba McEntire audition in 3 weeks. And I feel like I'm drowning. So, swim." "What?" Robert leaned forward, his expression serious. "You're drowning? Then swim. You don't have time to panic, Danny. You don't have time to second-guess yourself. You just have to move forward, one stroke at a time. It's not that simple. It never is. But it's the only way." Robert coughed, then continued. "When your mother died, I thought I'd drown. I thought the grief would pull me under, and that would be it. But I had you, and you needed me, so I swam. And when I got diagnosed, when they told me it was stage 3 and my odds weren't great, I thought about drowning again. But then I thought about you, about your music, about getting to see you make something of yourself. So I swam." Tears stung Daniel's eyes. "You shouldn't have to be the strong one right now. You're the one who's sick. Strength isn't about not being sick or not being scared. It's about keeping going anyway." Robert smiled, that gentle smile that had comforted Daniel through skinned knees and broken hearts and every disappointment in between. "You've got this, son. I believe in you." Daniel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He picked up his guitar again, and this time, when he played, the music felt different. Still imperfect, still rough around the edges, but honest, real. Robert fell asleep in the chair, lulled by the music, and Daniel played on into the night. The second week brought new challenges. Robert had an appointment with his oncologist, Dr. Patricia Hendricks, at Vanderbilt Medical Center. The news wasn't good. The latest scans showed that the cancer hadn't responded as well to treatment as they'd hoped. Dr. Hendricks, a petite woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, laid out their options with clinical precision. "We can continue with the current treatment protocol, but I have to be honest with you. The likelihood of significant improvement is low," she said, looking between Robert and Daniel. "Or we can consider a more aggressive approach. It would be harder on you physically, Robert, but it might give us better results." "How much harder?" Daniel asked when his father didn't respond. "More intense side effects, more fatigue, nausea, possible complications. And it's more expensive, even with insurance." Daniel felt the familiar weight settling on his chest. "How much more expensive?" Dr. Hendricks pulled up some numbers on her computer, then wrote them on a notepad and slid it across the desk. Daniel looked at the figure and felt his stomach drop. It was more than he made in 6 months of street performing. "I see," he said quietly. Robert finally spoke, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I want the aggressive treatment. Dad, I want it, Danny. I'm not ready to give up yet." Dr. Hendricks looked at Daniel with sympathy. "We can work with you on payment plans, and there are some assistance programs that might help. I'll have my office manager, Claire Stevens, get in touch with you about options." After the appointment, Daniel pushed his father's wheelchair through the hospital corridors in silence. They'd taken to using a wheelchair for longer trips. Robert's energy just wasn't what it used to be. When they reached the parking lot, Daniel helped his father into their old Honda Civic, a car that was held together by prayer and duct tape at this point. "We'll figure it out," Robert said, as Daniel pulled out of the parking space. "Yeah," Daniel agreed, but he had no idea how. That night, Emily came over with takeout from a local diner. She could tell something was wrong the moment Daniel opened the door. What happened? He told her about the doctor's appointment, about the new treatment, about the cost. Emily listened, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. "How much do you need?" she asked when he finished. "More than you have. More than anyone has." Daniel picked at his food without eating. "I don't know what to do, Em. I want him to have the treatment. I want him to fight this. But I also need to keep a roof over our heads, and I need to prepare for this audition. And I don't know how to do it all." Emily was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "What if we started a GoFundMe? For your dad's medical expenses? People do it all the time." Daniel shook his head. "I can't ask strangers for money." "You're not asking." "I am. And they're not strangers. They're people who want to help. Come on, Danny. Pride is great and all, but it's not going to pay for chemo." She had a point, much as he hated to admit it. "I don't know. Let me set it up. You focus on your music, on getting ready for Reba McEntire. Let me handle this." Emily pulled out her phone, already typing. "We'll need some photos of your dad. A description of the situation. Em, I really don't think—" "Too late. I'm doing it." She looked up at him, her expression fierce. "You've been trying to carry this all by yourself for too long. Let other people help. Let me help." Daniel wanted to argue, but he was too tired, too overwhelmed. So he nodded, and Emily got to work. By the end of week 2, the GoFundMe had raised almost $3,000. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but it was more than Daniel had dared to hope for. People from Nashville, people from Robert's old workplace, even some random strangers moved by the story. They all contributed what they could. Daniel read the comments on the page late at night when he couldn't sleep. Messages of support, of encouragement, of hope. "Hang in there. Praying for you and your dad. Don't give up." Each comment felt like a lifeline, pulling him up when he wanted to sink. With the immediate financial pressure slightly eased, Daniel could focus more on his music. He practiced relentlessly, working through his set list over and over until the songs felt like extensions of himself. He reached out to a musician friend, Kyle Anderson, who had access to a modest recording studio. Kyle agreed to help him record proper demos for the A&R contact. Lawrence Bennett refusing to accept payment. "You'd do the same for me," Kyle said, adjusting microphone levels. "Yeah, but you have an actual job. I'm just a street performer." Kyle looked at him seriously. "You're not just anything, man. You're Daniel Foster, and you're about to blow up. I'm just getting in on the ground floor." They recorded 3 songs over the course of 2 days. When they finished, Daniel had something he could actually be proud of. Professional quality recordings that showcased his songwriting and vocal abilities. He emailed them to Lawrence Bennett that night, then tried not to obsess over whether he'd respond. On day 15, with 2 weeks left until the audition, Daniel received an email. It was from Lawrence Bennett, and Daniel's hands shook as he opened it. "Daniel, listen to your demos. You've got potential. Not quite ready for a label deal yet, but keep working. Stay in touch. If the Reba McEntire thing pans out, call me. LB." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was something in between. Acknowledgement, possibility, a door left slightly ajar. Daniel read the email 5 times, analyzing every word, trying to extract meaning from the brevity. "Progress," Emily said when he showed it to her. "It's all progress." And she was right. Slowly, painfully, one day at a time, Daniel was building something. The audition was approaching, and while the fear hadn't gone away, it had been joined by something else: determination. He was going to be ready. The third week was when everything started to fall apart and come together simultaneously. On day 16, Daniel's landlord, Victor Hayes, knocked on the apartment door. Victor was a heavy-set man in his 60s who owned several properties in the Antioch area. He'd been patient with Daniel's late rent payments, more patient than he had any obligation to be, but patience had its limits. "Danny, we need to talk," Victor said when Daniel opened the door. They sat at the kitchen table, and Victor pulled out a folder containing copies of Daniel's lease and payment history. The numbers told a grim story. 3 months of missed payments, promises to catch up that hadn't materialized. A growing debt that couldn't be ignored forever. "I like you and your dad," Victor began, his tone apologetic. "You've been good tenants. But I'm running a business here, not a charity. I've got my own bills, my own mortgage. I can't keep carrying you." "I know. I'm sorry. We're trying. I know you're trying. But trying doesn't pay the bills." Victor sighed, running a hand over his face. "Look, I'm giving you until the end of the month. That's 3 weeks from now. If you can't get current by then, I'm going to have to start eviction proceedings." Daniel felt his world tilt. "Victor, my dad is sick. We can't—" "I know, and I'm sorry. I really am. But I don't have a choice anymore." Victor stood, leaving the folder on the table. "End of the month, Danny. Figure something out." After Victor left, Daniel sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the papers. 3 weeks. The audition with Reba McEntire was in 2 weeks. And even if it went perfectly, even if it led somewhere, there was no way it would result in immediate money. These things took time: contracts, negotiations, actual recording sessions. Time he didn't have. He pulled out his phone and opened his bank account app. The balance stared back at him. 237. 42s. The GoFundMe money had already been allocated to his father's upcoming treatment. Between rent, utilities, food, and medications, there was no path forward that made sense. Robert found him there an hour later, still sitting, still staring. "That bad?" his father asked, easing himself into a chair. Daniel told him about the conversation with Victor, about the deadline. Robert listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled. "We could ask Emily again," Robert suggested hesitantly. "No, she's done enough. More than enough." "Then what?" Daniel didn't have an answer. They sat together in silence as the afternoon light faded into evening. 2 men trying to solve an impossible equation. The next day, day 17, Daniel was back on his corner, playing with a desperate intensity. He needed to make money, as much and as fast as possible. But the universe seemed determined to work against him. The weather was cold, discouraging foot traffic. The few people who did pass by were in a hurry, not interested in stopping for street music. By early afternoon, he'd made less than $20. "This is pathetic," he muttered to himself, packing up his guitar. Maybe he should try a different location. Broadway, perhaps, where the tourists congregated. It would mean competing with dozens of other performers. But at least there would be people. He was walking toward his car when someone called his name. "Daniel Foster!" He turned to find a woman in her early 40s, professionally dressed, approaching him with a purposeful stride. She had dark hair pulled into a bun and carried a leather portfolio under one arm. "Yes?" Daniel said cautiously. "My name is Angela Martinez. I'm a music journalist for Nashville Spotlight magazine." She extended her hand, and Daniel shook it, confused. "I heard about you from a friend, Emily Richardson. She's a nurse at Vanderbilt. We went to college together." "Emily told you about me?" "In a way. She shared your GoFundMe on social media, and I was moved by your story." Then I did some digging, found some of your street performances on YouTube. People record them and post them, you know, and I was impressed." Angela smiled. "I'd like to do a feature on you. Human interest angle. Struggling musician caring for sick father. Recently discovered by Reba McEntire. It's a compelling story." Daniel's first instinct was to refuse. He didn't want to be a charity case, didn't want people's pity. But then he thought about the rent, about the deadline, about his father. What would it involve? An interview, some photos, maybe I come watch you perform. We'd publish it online and in the print edition. It wouldn't solve all your problems, but it would give you exposure. And sometimes exposure leads to opportunities. Angela pulled a card from her portfolio. "Think about it. Call me if you're interested." Daniel took the card, adding it to his growing collection. Another contact, another possibility, another uncertainty. That evening, he discussed it with Robert and Emily, who'd stopped by with groceries. "You should do it," Emily said immediately. "Ang is great. She's fair, and she tells real stories. This could be amazing for you." "I don't want people thinking I'm using my dad's illness to get ahead," Daniel said. Robert spoke up, his voice firm despite his physical weakness. "Danny, if telling your story helps people understand what you're going through, what we're both going through, then there's no shame in that. Besides, it's not just about you. It's about everyone out there struggling to make it in this city while dealing with real life. Maybe someone reads about us and feels less alone." Daniel considered this. His father had a point. Nashville was full of musicians chasing dreams while working 3 jobs, caring for families, fighting personal battles. Maybe their story would resonate. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll do it." The interview happened 2 days later, on day 19. Angela met Daniel at a coffee shop in East Nashville, a cozy place called the Wooden Nickel that smelled of espresso and fresh pastries. She bought him coffee and a sandwich, which he appreciated more than she probably realized. And they talked for 2 hours. Angela asked thoughtful questions, listening intently to his answers. She asked about his childhood, about how he'd discovered music, about his mother's death when he was 19, about his father's diagnosis. She asked about his dreams, his influences, his songwriting process. And she asked about meeting Reba McEntire, about the audition now just over a week away. "Are you nervous?" Angela asked, her recorder capturing every word. "Terrified," Daniel admitted. "This feels like my one shot, you know? If I blow it, what makes you think you'll blow it?" "Because I'm nobody. I'm just a guy who plays on street corners. And I'm going to be performing for Reba McEntire and a bunch of industry professionals who've heard everything. What if I'm not good enough?" Angela set down her coffee, looking at him seriously. "Daniel, from what I've seen and heard, you are good enough. But even if things don't work out with this particular audition, it doesn't mean you're not good enough. It just means it wasn't the right fit at that moment. The music industry is as much about timing and luck as it is about talent. That's not very comforting. Maybe not, but it's true." She smiled. "And for what it's worth, I think you're going to do great. You've got something real, something authentic. That counts for a lot." They talked more, and Angela took photos. Daniel with his guitar, Daniel at the coffee shop counter, Daniel looking contemplative by the window. It felt surreal, being the subject of attention instead of background noise. Before they parted ways, Angela said, "The article will run online in 3 days and in print next week. I'll send you a link when it's live." "Thank you," Daniel said, "for taking the time, for caring about the story. Thank you for trusting me with it." On day 22, the article went live. Emily texted Daniel the link at 7 in the morning, adding, "You're famous!" Daniel opened the link on his phone, his heart pounding. The article was titled, "Chasing Dreams on Music Row: Daniel Foster's Journey from Street Corners to Spotlight." Angela had crafted a beautiful piece, weaving together his personal struggles, his passion for music, and his upcoming audition into a narrative that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The article was shared hundreds of times on social media. The GoFundMe, which had plateaued around $3,000, suddenly surged. 4,000, 5,000, 7,000. Comments poured in from strangers offering encouragement, from local venues offering performance opportunities, from other musicians offering support and advice. Daniel's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friend requests, messages, emails, people he'd never met wanting to connect, to help, to be part of his story. "This is insane," he told Emily, scrolling through notifications. "This is what happens when people see someone worth rooting for," she replied. "Enjoy it, Danny. You've earned this." That afternoon, Daniel received a phone call from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, overwhelmed by all the communication. But something made him pick up. "Daniel Foster?" The voice was female, vaguely familiar. "Yes? This is Jennifer Walsh. I'm Reba McEntire's assistant. We met briefly the day Reba invited you to the audition." Daniel's breath caught. "Yes, I remember. Is everything okay? The audition is still happening, right?" "Absolutely. Actually, that's why I'm calling. Reba saw the Nashville Spotlight article this morning. She wanted me to reach out and let you know she's looking forward to hearing you perform. She also wanted me to tell you not to be nervous. Just be yourself." Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. In the midst of everything, with her schedule and obligations and fame, Reba McEntire had taken time to read about him and send encouragement. "Thank you," he managed. "Please tell her thank you." "I will. See you in a week, Daniel." After the call ended, Daniel sat on his couch, guitar in lap, and cried. Not from sadness or fear, but from gratitude and hope and the overwhelming realization that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. The final week before the audition was a whirlwind of practice, preparation, and unexpected support. The GoFundMe reached $10,000, enough to cover the back rent, catch up on utilities, and contribute significantly to Robert's medical bills. Daniel cried when he saw the total, overwhelmed by the generosity of friends and strangers alike. Victor, the landlord, called to say he'd seen the article. "Take your time with the rent," he said gruffly, "and good luck with that audition." Robert started the aggressive treatment protocol, which left him sick and exhausted, but also strangely optimistic. "I'm going to be there," he told Daniel, "at the audition. Emily's going to bring me. I'm going to watch you shine. Dad, you should rest." "I'll rest when I'm dead, which isn't going to be anytime soon if this treatment works." Robert smiled weakly. "I've missed too much already. I'm not missing this." On the night before the audition, day 29, Daniel couldn't sleep. He ran through his set list in his head, second-guessing every song choice, every lyrical decision. At 2 in the morning, he gave up on sleep and went to the living room, picking up his guitar. He played quietly, not wanting to wake his father. The songs flowed from him, each one a piece of his soul, his story, his hope. And as he played, the fear began to subside, replaced by something calmer. Acceptance. Whatever happened tomorrow, he'd given everything he had. He'd done the work, faced the challenges, refused to quit. The rest was up to fate, luck, and the music itself. As dawn broke over Nashville, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Daniel Foster finally felt ready. Tomorrow would change everything. November 15th arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm weather. Daniel woke early, showered, and put on the clothes Emily had helped him pick out. Dark jeans, a simple button-down shirt in navy blue, his least worn pair of boots. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. Not a street performer, but a musician, a professional. Wanderlog Robert was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. He'd had a rough night. Daniel had heard him getting sick around 3 in the morning, but he was dressed and determined. "You ready?" Robert asked. "As I'll ever be." They ate a quiet breakfast together, neither saying much. There wasn't much to say. The work was done. Now came the test. Emily arrived at 9:30 to pick them up. The audition was scheduled for noon at a private studio in the Berry Hill neighborhood, south of downtown Nashville. Reba had chosen an intimate venue, a place where music felt personal rather than commercial. The drive felt both endless and too short. Emily tried to make conversation, cracking jokes to ease the tension. But Daniel could only manage distracted responses. His guitar case sat in the back seat, and he kept turning around to make sure it was still there, an irrational fear that it might somehow disappear. They arrived at the studio at 11:30. The building was nondescript from the outside, a renovated warehouse with a small parking lot. But inside, it was state-of-the-art, all soundproofing and high-end equipment and the faint echo of music that had been made there before. Jennifer Walsh greeted them at the reception area. "Daniel, good to see you again. And you must be Robert and Emily." She shook hands warmly. "Reba's finishing up with another artist, but she'll be ready for you right at noon. There's a green room down the hall where you can wait. Help yourselves to water, coffee, whatever you need." The green room was small but comfortable. A couch, some chairs, a table with refreshments. Robert sank gratefully into the couch while Emily got him water. Daniel couldn't sit. He paced, guitar in hand, running through fingering patterns in his mind. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor," Emily observed. "Sorry. I need to move." "It's going to be fine, Danny," Robert said. "Better than fine. It's going to be incredible." At 11:55, Jennifer appeared. "We're ready for you, Daniel." This was it. Daniel looked at his father, at Emily, drawing strength from their presence. "Wish me luck." "You don't need luck," Robert said. "You've got talent." Daniel followed Jennifer down a corridor and through a heavy soundproof door. The performance space was surprisingly intimate. A small stage area with professional lighting, a few rows of chairs facing it. Seated in those chairs were Reba McEntire and 4 other people Daniel didn't recognize but assumed were industry professionals. Reba stood when she saw him, that warm smile lighting up her face. "Daniel, so glad you made it. How are you feeling?" "Nervous," he admitted. "Good. Means you care." She gestured to the others. "These are some friends and colleagues of mine, producers, songwriters, label folks. They're here to listen with fresh ears. But honestly, play for yourself. If the music is true to you, it'll reach everyone else." Daniel nodded, moving to the small stage. He sat on the stool that had been set up, adjusted his guitar, tested the microphone. The lights were bright, but not harsh. He could see the faces of his small audience clearly. Reba's encouraging expression. The professional curiosity of the others. "Take your time," Reba said, "whenever you're ready." Daniel closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first song was the one Reba had heard on the street corner that rainy October day. The melancholic but hopeful piece about struggling and surviving. His voice shook slightly on the first few words. But as the song progressed, confidence took over. This was who he was. This was what he'd lived through. Every note, every lyric, carried the weight of his experience. When he finished, there was a moment of silence, and then applause. Not polite clapping, but genuine appreciation. "That's beautiful," Reba said. "What else do you have for us?" He played a second song, this one more upbeat, about Nashville itself, the city of dreams and heartbreak, where everyone came to make it big, and most ended up making ends meet. It was funny and sad and true, and he saw several people smile in recognition. The third song was personal, written for his father. It was about watching someone you love fight against impossible odds, about being helpless to fix things, about love that transcends words. Daniel's voice cracked on the chorus, emotion-overwhelming technique, but it didn't matter. The truth in the song spoke louder than any perfect performance could. When he finished the final chord, there were tears on more than one face in the audience. Reba stood, applauding, and the others followed suit. "Daniel Foster," Reba said, "you are the real deal." One of the other people in the audience, a man in his 50s wearing glasses, spoke up. "I'm Todd Harrison, independent producer. That last song, I want to record that. I want to help you record a proper EP. If you're interested." Another person, a woman with short red hair, added, "Jessica Brennan, I run a boutique management company. We should talk about representation." Daniel looked around, stunned. Was this really happening? Reba walked over to him, putting a hand on his shoulder. 30 days ago, I heard something special in your music, something authentic, and you didn't waste that time. You worked, you grew, you showed up ready. That says as much about your character as your talent." She paused. "I can't promise you overnight success. This industry doesn't work that way. But I can promise you that if you keep doing what you're doing, writing from the heart, working hard, staying true to yourself, you'll make it. Maybe not in the way you imagined, but you'll make it." "Thank you," Daniel managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me, for giving me this chance. I won't forget it." "I know you won't." Reba smiled. "Now, I believe your father and your friend are waiting to hear how it went. Go tell them." Daniel practically ran back to the green room, bursting through the door with such energy that Emily jumped. "Well?" she demanded. "I think I just got a producer and a manager," Daniel said, laughing in disbelief. I think this is really happening." Robert stood, moving slowly but steadily, and pulled his son into a hug. "I'm so proud of you. Your mother would be so proud." They stayed there for a moment, father and son, celebrating a moment years in the making. Over the following days, Daniel's life transformed in ways he couldn't have imagined. He met with Todd Harrison to discuss recording an EP, a process that would take several months, but would result in professional, distributable music. He met with Jessica Brennan, who outlined a management strategy focused on building his career sustainably, rather than chasing quick fame. The Nashville Spotlight article led to more media attention. Local news stations interviewed him. Radio DJs played clips of his street performances. Venues around Nashville reached out, offering him real gigs with actual paychecks. The money from the GoFundMe, combined with the rent payment cushion from Victor and the incoming performance fees, meant Daniel and Robert could breathe financially for the first time in years. Robert continued his aggressive treatment, and while it was brutal, the latest scans showed the tumors shrinking. Dr. Hendricks was cautiously optimistic, a phrase Robert celebrated like a championship. 30 days after meeting Reba McEntire in the rain, Daniel stood on the stage at the Bluebird Cafe, the legendary venue where careers were launched, performing in front of a sold-out crowd. The show had been organized by Reba herself, a songwriter's night featuring several artists she believed in. Daniel was the opening act, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. In the audience, Emily and Robert sat at a table near the front. Robert wrapped in a blanket, but smiling more broadly than Daniel had seen in years. Further back, Lawrence Bennett, the A&R executive who'd heard Daniel on the street, watched with interest. Angela Martinez was there too, already planning a follow-up article. And in the back, standing near the bar, Reba McEntire watched with satisfaction. She'd discovered countless artists over her decades in the industry, had helped launch dozens of careers. But there was something special about Daniel Foster's story. Not just the talent, but the perseverance, the heart, the refusal to give up even when giving up would have been understandable. As Daniel played his final song of the night, the one he'd written for his father, Reba thought about that rainy afternoon in October. She'd been on her way to dinner, running late, had 100 things on her mind. She could have walked right past the young man playing guitar in the rain, could have assumed someone else would help, someone else would listen. But she'd stopped. She'd listened. She'd taken a chance on a stranger with a dream. And that simple gesture, that moment of seeing someone, truly seeing them, had changed a life. Maybe 2 lives. The simple gesture of Reba McEntire turned into an extraordinary reward. After 30 days, maybe 2 lives, if she was being honest with herself. Because in helping Daniel, she'd been reminded of why she'd gotten into this business in the first place. Not for the awards or the fame, but for the music itself, for the stories that needed to be told, for the voices that deserved to be heard. As the crowd erupted in applause, Daniel looked out at the sea of faces. He saw his father, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. He saw Emily, clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. He saw industry professionals who weeks ago wouldn't have given him a second glance, now on their feet. But most of all, he saw possibility. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. It never was in Nashville, where talent was as common as hot chicken and honky-tonks. There would be setbacks, disappointments, doors that closed in his face. The music industry was notoriously difficult, even for those with connections and resources. But Daniel Foster wasn't starting from nothing anymore. He had an EP in production, management representation, and most importantly, a community of people who believed in him. The 30 days that had started with a chance encounter in the rain had transformed into a foundation upon which he could build a real career. After the show, as the crowd mingled and musicians packed up their equipment, Reba made her way to Daniel's corner of the venue. He was talking with Todd Harrison about studio schedules when he noticed her approaching. "Miss McEntire," he said, still unable to call her simply Reba, despite her insistence. "Thank you again for tonight, for everything. You earned this, Daniel, every bit of it." She glanced over at Robert, who was being carefully helped to his feet by Emily. "How's your father doing?" "Better. The new treatment is working. The doctors are optimistic." Daniel's voice caught. "He almost didn't make it to see this. And if you hadn't stopped that day, if you hadn't taken a chance..." Reba shook her head. "I didn't take a chance, Daniel. I recognized something worth paying attention to. There's a difference." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You know, I've been in this industry for nearly 50 years. I've seen thousands of talented people come through Nashville. Some make it, some don't. And you want to know what separates them? Talent? Partly. But mostly, it's resilience. It's showing up day after day, even when nobody's watching. It's playing your heart out on a street corner in the rain because the music matters more than comfort." She smiled. "You had that before you ever met me. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it." Daniel nodded, understanding the truth in her words. The work hadn't started 30 days ago on that rainy corner. It had started years earlier, in small-town bars and open mic nights, in his childhood bedroom writing songs nobody heard. In every moment, he'd chosen music over easier paths. "What do I do now?" he asked. "Everything's moving so fast." You keep being yourself. You write honest songs. You remember where you came from and the people who helped you along the way. Reba glanced around the Bluebird Cafe, the venue that had launched so many careers, including parts of her own journey decades ago. And you pay it forward. Someday, you're going to be the established artist, and you're going to see some kid playing on a street corner. Remember how this felt. Remember to stop and listen. I will. I promise. Robert appeared then, moving slowly but steadily, Emily supporting his arm. Up close, the effects of treatment were visible. The pallor, the weight loss, the tremor in his hands, but his eyes were bright, alive with joy. "Mr. Foster," Reba said warmly, extending her hand, "your son is extraordinary." "I know," Robert said simply, shaking her hand. "Takes after his mother." They all laughed, and for a moment, the weight of illness and struggle and uncertainty lifted. This was what mattered. Connection, community, the shared experience of creating and celebrating art. As the evening wound down and the venue slowly emptied, Daniel helped his father to Emily's car. The Nashville night was cool but clear, the city lights reflecting off windows and wet pavement from an earlier brief shower. Music drifted from the honky-tonks on Broadway, the eternal soundtrack of Music City. "How are you feeling, Dad?" Daniel asked, as they drove through the familiar streets of neighborhoods like Edge Hill and Berry Hill. "Tired, happy, proud." Robert leaned his head against the window. "And grateful. So grateful." "Me too." Back at the apartment in Antioch, the apartment they no longer had to worry about losing, Daniel helped his father to bed. Robert fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted but peaceful. Daniel stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his father breathe, counting each rise and fall of his chest like a prayer. In the living room, Emily was making tea, moving comfortably around the small kitchen like she'd done 1,000 times before. "You did it," she said, handing him a mug. "You really did it." "We did it," Daniel corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Em. Without you and Dad and Angela and everyone who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. That's what people do. We show up for each other." She sat on the couch, and Daniel joined her. "So what's next? Besides the EP and world domination?" Daniel laughed. "One step at a time, I think. Record the EP, build a following, write more songs, see where it goes. It's going to go far. I know it." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping tea, listening to the quiet sounds of the apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, distant traffic, the neighbor's television through thin walls. Ordinary sounds that felt extraordinary because Daniel no longer took them for granted. His phone buzzed. A text from Todd Harrison. "Great show tonight. Let's start recording next week. You ready?" Daniel typed back, "Ready." And he was. After years of struggling, of uncertainty, of wondering if he'd ever get his chance, Daniel Foster was ready. 6 months later, on a mild spring afternoon, Daniel Foster released his debut EP, Corner Songs. The 5-track collection featured the songs he'd played at the audition, plus 2 new compositions. It wasn't a massive commercial success, didn't hit any major charts or generate millions of streams, but it resonated with the people who heard it, earning critical praise from music journalists and steady rotation on independent radio stations across the country. Robert Foster's cancer went into remission. The aggressive treatment had worked, buying him time. How much time, nobody could say for certain, but enough to see his son's dream taking shape. Emily Richardson remained Daniel's closest friend and fiercest supporter, attending every show, celebrating every milestone, providing reality checks when needed. And Reba McEntire continued to be an icon, a legend, and occasionally when she saw someone worth seeing, a guardian angel in a burgundy leather jacket. The story of their rainy day encounter became part of Nashville folklore, shared in songwriters' circles and music industry meetings. It became a reminder that in a city built on dreams, sometimes the difference between making it and missing out is as simple as someone taking the time to stop and listen. Daniel never forgot the lesson. Years later, when he'd become an established artist with his own following, he made it a point to attend open mic nights at small venues, to listen to street performers, to remember that talent exists everywhere. It just needs to be seen. And on rainy October afternoons, when the weather turned gray and cold over Nashville, he sometimes drove down to Music Row, to that corner where everything changed, and he'd remember. Remember the fear, the hope, the sound of rain on pavement, and the moment a simple gesture turned into an extraordinary reward. Because that's what kindness does. It multiplies, it transforms, it creates ripples that extend far beyond the original act. Reba McEntire had stopped for a struggling street musician and changed his life. But in doing so, she'd reminded everyone who heard the story that we all have the power to see people, to lift them up, to be the difference between despair and hope. And 30 days, just 30 days, can change everything.